Hello, I'm Russell Rowland, and this is The Song of Roland, a podcast about American culture. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to introduce my good friend Alan Morris Jones, who is recently named the new Montana Poet Laureate.
My name's Alan Jones. This is a newer poem. It's just a few weeks old. It's called Driving Montana with My Son. See how the posts stand both apart and of a piece. How the barbed wire braided runs both apart and of a piece. The fence disappears in the distance, joining the graded gravel road. A rancher or roustabout, a rancher's son, daughter, niece, nephew home from school set those posts, strung the wire. Split a nail, then danced the fierce familiar jig of bruised thumbs. We survive, we persist, carry on according to the labor of others. Stale sweat, dried blood, a cuss word or two. In the land of verbs, our job is continuance. We are meant to continue the work begun by others. Carry a flame room to room. Elsewhere, even now, the wealthy and powerful are deciding what to do with the rest of us. Those people can go fuck themselves. Son, pay good attention. Walk room to room, shielding your share of what matters. This will be your work. This will be the work of a lifetime.
Thank you for coming, and congratulations, my friend.
Thanks, Russell. Thanks for having me on your podcast, man. This is cool.
My pleasure. So has Mike Johnson sworn you in yet, or?
You know, as part of the paperwork, they did pass along an oath of office. So
did they really?
So I had to go get sign a piece of paper that saying I would support the Montana Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and I went down to one of the postal service branch things and got it notarized. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna read your credits here, and you might want to have a cup of coffee and a donut because it's long. So you were the editor of the Big Sky Journal. You were the editor of New West, which I was around for a long time.
I was the books and writers editor for New West. So I was not. I was in charge of a page on the larger website, but I wasn't in charge of the whole thing.
Right.
Yep.
Founder, publisher for Bangtail Press, which published 2 of my books. The author of 3 novels, Last Year's River, A Bloom of Bones, and Sweeney Rocks, all of which I loved. The author of A Quiet Place of Violence, which is just a really thoughtful book about hunting. And you are the author of 3 children's books, all released in the last few years: Montana for Kids, Yellowstone for Kids, and Good Hunting for Kids. You also did all the illustrations for those. And the author of MUMBLECUSSER, which was the collection of poetry that won the High Plains Book Award a couple of years ago, and I'm sure it was instrumental in your being named the Poet Laureate. So what did I miss? I know you were an acquisitions editor for a publisher for a while too, weren't you?
Yeah. It all kind of makes me tired hearing it.
Yeah, you've been working hard.
I worked, I published my first novel, Last Year's River, in 2001. And then a few years later, I ended up going back into the editorial side of things. I worked as initially as a general sort of all-purpose editor for Globe-Pequot Press, which at that time they had an office in Helena where I worked. I moved from Livingston to Helena at the time. But under that imprint, there was Lions Press, there was Falcon Press, and Two Dot, sort of local history stuff. Um, so I worked on staff for them for I think 3 years maybe, and then I stepped back. I left the company, and then a few months later I came back under contract, sort of as a freelance acquisitions editor. So
Okay.
I was the reason I quit, the reason I left. I wanted to go live in New York with my girlfriend and then fiance, now wife, and they wanted me in Helena. So amicably, we split.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then I lived in New York, and they came back and said, "Would you like to be the hook and bullet editor for Lions Press?" So I
Mm.
came back to Globe acquiring for their sporting list for the hunting and fishing shelf,
Okay.
which was a gas. That was a lot of fun. I did that for another 3 or 4 years, something like
Okay.
this. So I was with that company for about 7 years, I think.
I didn't
Um,
realize it was that long.
yeah, uh, really, really good experience. Um, very good coming from the magazine world, from Big Sky Journal, from last year's River, which was published very well by Houghton Mifflin. So it's sort of um, the machine of it is intricate, and I mean you've been through that process too. There's the publicists and the marketing folks, and there's when you publish a book at that level, it's almost its own ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
So coming from that, then to sort of a mid-level um, publishing ecosystem, and then seeing it from the editorial side of the desk, both of those were great experiences, very informative
Right.
to kind of get a glimpse into how the whole thing works. The whole,
Mm-hmm.
you know, not just this aspect of publishing, but kind of
Right.
everything. So,
Yeah. I wanted to start by asking you about how it shaped you growing up in Livingston and the Paradise Valley, one of the most beautiful parts of Montana, and a writer's paradise for sure too.
right. Yeah, man, Livingston's a huge part of my life still. I tell people I almost wish I hadn't grown up there, because it's such a cool little town that everybody has baggage from their childhood, from their old hometown. Um, so I would love to be able to come to Livingston cold and just say, this is such a cool
Mm.
little town. It doesn't have any of the adolescent baggage that anybody gets from growing up in a place. I love Livingston. I don't know that I could live there now. For one thing, the wind is a lot fiercer than I remember it. I think it's fair that growing up in that community of being aware of those writers was an influence. Certainly. I was reading Tom McGuane, Tim Cahill, Russell Chatham, William Yortzberg. I was reading all those guys very early, just
Mm-hmm.
because they were part of the conversation. You'd go to a you'd go to a dinner party and people would be talking about McGuane's novels. Um, and I was a kid, so I would be listening over here, eavesdropping, overhearing the grown-ups talking about, right? Um, and so out of curiosity, if nothing else, you go to those books, um, and you try to figure out what the big deal is. My dad also had a lifetime subscription to Gray's Sporting Journal, and so that was a big influence too. So I was in Livingston, and I was seeing a lot of those same writers. So I was seeing Chatham show up in Gray's Sporting Journal, and knowing that he was a part of the community that you know was around. So that was an influence as well.
Yeah.
I paid better attention maybe
Mm.
to who these writers were just by virtue of seeing them in print and understanding that they were a part of something larger.
So is it fair to say that you were probably more likely to think about becoming a writer because you were exposed to a lot of those people early on, or do you think you would have been drawn to that anyway?
Uh,
Hard question to answer, probably.
yeah, it's I don't know that
Yeah.
I wouldn't being around on the edges of that community. I don't know that made me be a writer or not.
Yeah. So how old were you when you became the Big Sky Journal editor the first time? You did it twice.
I started working for that magazine not long out of college. I graduated in '93 from U of M. I took a year off. I took a gap year, during which time I wrote my first book. I wrote the ethics book. And then in '94, I started working for Big Sky Journal, um, as a distribution director was the name of the title. It was I was in charge of uh, maintaining and acquiring newsstand distribution points and typing in subscriptions.
Mm.
Mostly, I wanted the job because it gave me some sort of foot in the door, an entree into publishing, which I knew I wanted to. At that point, I knew I wanted to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
And then in '95, a year later, there was a shakeup at the magazine, and I was the kid that knew a little something about what was going on editorially, and I was in a position to work for not much money. I think that was attractive to the ownership too.
Yeah.
And so they gave me the editorship,
Wow.
and I worked there from '95 to 2000.
So
Great,
you were in your
also a
20s.
fantastic experience. That
Yeah.
was, I tell people that was my graduate school. That was, um, I had some, I mentioned growing up on the edges of that community in Livingston, knowing who these writers were. And then suddenly I'm faced with actually working with them as a colleague and in some cases as an editor. So
Right.
that was it was eye opening and occasionally very stressful, and really a fantastic experience.
Yeah. Well, why don't you talk about working with you worked with a lot of the best writers going at the
Mm.
time, especially in this region. Um, so yeah, what was that like? Like you said, it was probably a little stressful at times, but did you learn a lot from those people?
I learned so much. I
Yeah.
learned a ton. You learn a little something from every writer that if they're good enough to be published, and if you are engaged with them as an editor, if you are involved in their work to that extent, you're reading it and rereading it and reading it again, and you're interacting with them on a quid pro quo editorial discussion. If you're engaged in the work in that way, you learn something from everyone. If you don't learn, then you're not probably engaged with the work deeply enough.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, looking back at that experience, I think the most valuable lesson I learned is that the professional writers, the guys who really know what they're doing, and who do it for a living, welcome that editorial discussion.
Right.
If you bring something to the table that can help my work, then by all means, man, go at it.
Yeah.
Whatever you can do to improve what I have offered on the way to publication, that's a great gift to the writer.
Mm.
The professional writers realize that and kind of eagerly engage in that editorial discussion. The less professional writers are the ones who defend their work at all costs. Just by virtue of the fact that I wrote something, it's sacrosanct, and
Yeah.
how dare you, suggest that I, move some commas around, and that lesson has held true to this day. The more professional writers I've worked with as an editor welcome editorial feedback. The folks who don't really seem to know what they're doing are, inappropriately defensive of their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That
And
makes
that's
me think.
a good lesson for a young writer.
Definitely, yeah. Makes me think of when I was in grad school. There was a few people, but actually one in particular who, like, he argued with every single suggestion that anybody made, and
Yeah.
he was the first one to get published. He was a good writer, but as far as I know, that one book was the only one that ever got published because he was just so rigid,
Yeah.
and like you say, inflexible.
Some of that comes from insecurity, I think. Deep down, you understand that you're a little bit out of your depth, and so you tend to inappropriately defend your work.
Right.
It doesn't, in the long term. I mean, maybe that person could publish a book or a few articles initially, but in the long term, if you're a pain in the ass like that, then it doesn't benefit your larger career.
No.
Editors will start to avoid you if they
Yeah.
understand that you're difficult in that way.
Right.
I mean, and I'm also not saying that you should roll over. I mean, you pick your
Yeah.
battles, right? So,
Exactly. Yeah.
you know your work, you know what you want to accomplish. Here is the heart and soul of this piece of journalism or this short story or this novel. This is what I'm going to defend at all costs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And everything else we can quibble over. I don't.
Right.
If you want to put this chapter before the next chapter, if it helps the narrative flow, then by all means, that looks good. But don't touch the moral lesson I'm trying to impart.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is.
Talk about Last Year's River. How did that come about? And I know the timing ended up being pretty bad. It came out right around the time of 9/11. But
Yeah.
Talk about that whole experience, what it was like.
It was a great experience. I had this idea for a novel, and I'd written notes on it in early chapters while I was editor of the magazine. And then I pretty quickly realized that I was going to have to leave the editorial job to finish it. It was a full-time job, and by the time I got 25% of the way through it, it's like, well, I really want to finish this book. I think there's a lot of potential here. I can't do it while I'm at the magazine. So I stepped down to finish the book. I finished it about 9 months later. And fortunately, I was able to. I had an agent lined up before I left the magazine. The agent was able to pretty quickly sell it. We had a couple bidders on it. In retrospect, in hindsight, I'm very proud of the book. I think the book has a lot to offer. It still works well. It was published as well as it was for reasons that were perhaps ancillary to the book itself. I was the 30-year-old young editor of this well-regarded magazine in Montana, so I was young. I was already in the publishing space as an editor. I was going to get blurbs from, the writers I had worked with at the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
I already had some street cred,
Yeah.
And so that all of that helped to publish the novel. And then, as you say, it was published 2 weeks after 9/11, which I always hesitate to mention 9/11 as an issue because in the larger landscapes of tragedy, my own experiences as a novelist are fairly insignificant. Nevertheless, having said that, a first novel depends on the press attention that it gets on publicity, profiles in this newspaper, that sort of thing. And so for the next 6 months after Last Year's River was published, all that stuff was really hard to come by.
Yeah.
So the first novel was published immediately after 9/11. It didn't get the attention it needed. And then it just went away. My editor at the time at Houghton said that he would, quote, publish anything I wrote. And then he proceeded to reject the next 2 novels that I sent, which was also a good lesson. Man, there's, Hollywood's full of assholes, but so is publishing. So you shouldn't take anything for granted. But I know from talking to you, I know that you and I had much the same experiences. You had your first novel came out of the gate big, and then you had a hard time with the follow-up as well.
Yeah. I think the biggest difference, though, and I've heard this story many times from other people too, is I had a pretty modest advance. You got a big advance, and I think in the publishing world that can be a bad thing if that first book doesn't do well. They just focus so much on the numbers, and they don't care how easy you were to work with or how cooperative you were and how hard you work at your next book. They just look at the bottom line, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah, the initial advance was and is a double-edged sword. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I got paid enough to put a down payment on a house in Missoula, um, which I moved there. My brother and his family were there. Uh, they were starting a family. They had a couple of young girls that I wanted to be uncle to, so it made sense for me to move to Missoula. I was able to buy a small house and live there for a few years. Um, but then the follow-up novels, Houghton Mifflin looked at the advance and they, clearly said we can't pay that again.
Yeah.
And then the other publishers that we then submitted to as well, they were not willing to pony up in that same neighborhood again. So,
Right.
and you, as a writer, you're at the mercy of your agent, and the agent isn't going to say, "We'll take less money." That's not what they're about, So there is this weird limbo that you find yourself in after you've received a nice advance like that.
Mm-hmm. I admired Bloom of Bones probably more than any other thing you've written. I love that novel, and that was, I know, highly autobiographical. Although, of course, the main character was not like you, but similar in some ways. So, you want to talk about how you got that one published? And that was just a beautiful book.
Thank you. Some books come fairly easily. You know where you want to go. You start out writing. Last year's River, I had written the end of the book almost as soon as I wrote the beginning of the book. I knew exactly where I wanted to go with that. And then at that point, it's just a matter of filling in the middle. A Bloom of Bones was not that. I knew I wanted to write a story set in the Missouri Breaks, part of Montana I'm very familiar with. And I knew that it was probably going to be a literary crime novel of some sort, Even then, this was some years ago. Even then, I was thinking in terms of genre and in terms of having that overarching question. It's one of the things that I really appreciate about crime novels and mysteries. And, once you have that overarching question within the narrative, it gives you all sorts of room to play around. Once the reader is captured, once they want to find out what happens, within that structure, then you can do all sorts of other interesting things without losing the reader. So I knew I wanted to fiddle around in that space. Everything else was up for grabs. And so I had any number of different versions of that book. The book that I ended up publishing is fairly short. I think it's only 55 or 60,000 words. And the initial draft of it was probably at least twice as long, maybe 3 times as long. It's not that it was bad. It's just that it was unnecessary. It was fluff on the central story and was a distraction. So on the way to seeing that one took a long time to get published. And had several different iterations that I would submit to first round I gave it to my agent. She sent it out, got rejected by the larger publishers. I revisited, ended up losing my agent in there somewhere. We parted ways. And then I found another agent, submitted Bloom of Bones, one iteration to the new agent, revisited, revised. The version that ended up being published I think is a much better book than what I had initially started with. But boy, that book took a lot. That was a lot of effort behind that one.
It seems like a lot of times we write sections of novels for ourselves, and then end up realizing they're not really crucial to the overall story.
Right.
Yeah. So talk about you've published in so many different genres. Has that mainly just been because you're interested in all these different things, or has it been more of a matter of just trying to find your niche, or what? How did that happen?
I tell people sort of flippantly that I'm just trying to make a living, and then so you just you throw stuff at the wall and you see what's going to stick.
Yeah.
I, and there's some of that there, but I think more accurately, it's I I think I get bored. You know, I have something I want to accomplish in a given book, in a novel or an essay or what have you, and then I do that thing, and then I'm kind of done with it, right? So, and then I have to move on. But I also feel ill at ease if I don't have a bigger project going on. So I need something in the hopper, something to direct my reading, something to direct my, in the case of the children's books, the illustration techniques. I need something to inform my days at the desk. And so if I am done with fiction for a while, then I have to find something else. And the children's books, I think, came out of that a little bit. I had this idea that Montana for Kids, the first children's book, has done very well. It's still selling well. If I had a dozen different titles like that, then I'd be in high cotton, right? So I initially thought, well, I'll just keep writing children's books until I can, establish myself and get that income stream going, and that'll free me up for other stuff. But then 2 other children's books later, I'm pretty worn out by it.
Oh yeah, you're done with that.
So I don't know that I have all these other ideas for children's books, and at this particular moment, I don't know when I'll revisit.
Okay.
I should.
Yeah. Well,
I love the art form. Children's books are deceptively difficult. You look at a really well done kids book, and the narrative is whatever narrative there is. It's necessarily so tight, and whatever ideas you're trying to communicate, you have to communicate them in the most basic language. All the ideas are very simple, or no matter how complicated, you have to simplify them into put them in a place where even a kid can understand it, right? And so there's kids books are sort of adult books that have been distilled down. They're boiled down to their grit, sort of. And I really appreciate that about the art form.
Right.
And I don't think I would have fully appreciated it if I hadn't tried to do it myself.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing that looks like it would just be very easy.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I love your illustrations in those books.
Oh, thank you.
And of course, that makes me want to mention that you designed 5 of my covers.
Yeah.
You also designed the logo for this very podcast. So did you teach yourself all that?
Yes.
Yeah. It's impressive.
Early days of Bangtail Press, my small publishing company, coming out of the gate in a small press, I knew that I really wouldn't be able to afford to pay somebody else to do the design work. So I took a couple classes in the software we were living in Brooklyn at the time. So I took some adult continuing ed classes in the Adobe suite, so InDesign and Photoshop. And that's been another of the unexpected benefits of Bangtail. I really, really enjoy the design work.
Yeah.
This is a poem I just wrote. It's called The Pharmacist at Costco Asks. Any questions or concerns? Just the usual. Why are we here? What's it all about? What happens when we die? How do you handle your despair? Later, trying to remember where I parked my truck, I decide to become the kind of old man who jumps up and rides his cart across the parking lot. Joyful and impudent. Finally, what is poetry?
I want to hear you talk about your role as Poet Laureate. It hasn't been that long since you were named that, and it's already been clear to me that part of what you're focusing on with this role is promoting other people's work as much as yourself. What else do you have in mind as far as fulfilling that? Is it a 2-year thing or?
It's a 2-year
Yeah.
term.
Okay.
It's somewhat a work in progress, even still. So I was notified in late September. It's early November now, so about 6 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I received the appointment in the context of budget cuts to
Right.
Montana Committee for the Humanities, who had previously and still will moving forward administer the Speakers Bureau for the state, and the Montana Arts Council, both of which have been subject to
Yep.
budget cuts in the current political environment. And so it was a little uncertain initially just what that would look like in relation to the Poet Laureate position. It now looks like that we will have funding, so that I'll be able to go around the state and participate in the speakers program administered by the Committee for the Humanities, which is great news.
That is great.
So folks will be able to. They're going to have to kind of reconfigure things a little bit, but I understand that as of early January, people will be able to log onto their website and book the Poet Laureate for a speaking engagement. So
Right.
I'll be able to go around the state, to libraries, to schools, and I'll be able to speak on several different topics. I mean, we can, and that's still somewhat to be determined. But I think the way I would like to approach it now is I would like to do something with storytelling, sort of as a theme to the presentations and to the appearances, with the goal of moving toward some sort of publication at the end of it. I deeply admire. I don't. Have you ever followed or do you know about the Humans of New York?
Yes, I actually.
There's that guy in New York who
Yeah.
he does this amazing thing. He's been doing it for a few years, where he will do mostly man on the street interviews with these folks,
Right.
and take photos, and then within just a couple hundred words, he will encapsulate their life story, and it's often very moving, and it's always well done. In that context, there are a lot of stories to be told in Montana, and the Poet Laureate is in a position to solicit those stories. So the way I'm thinking right now is I will travel around the state and I'll give a presentation. I can talk children's books, I can talk poetry, I can talk novels, I can talk small press publishing if you want. I'm easy. If the library wants me in to celebrate children's books, I'll absolutely do that. But I think overall, the larger theme is going to be telling your story in the state of Montana. So how did you come to be where you are? What problems have you overcome to be who you are? What problems did your ancestors overcome to be who they were and to put you in this particular place and time?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk Montana stories. And then at the end of it, let's see if we can publish or produce some sort of compendium, whether it's a website, whether it's a published book, I don't know.
Right.
But I love the idea of traveling around Montana, a state that you and I both appreciate and love, and soliciting stories from people.
Yeah.
And I have to say that you have, in some ways, you have already done that with 56 counties. So maybe these two projects are sort of related.
Complementary.
Maybe this is 56 counties part 2. I don't know.
So talk to me about how you see the role of Western writers. It's whether it's changed, whether it's evolved, whether it's devolved, or in the time that you've been observing and involved in the publishing all these different people.
The landscape has changed, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be as interested in your thoughts in that regard as my own. When I first started publishing Big Sky Journal, early mid '90s, um, and it's hard to say if I'm looking at it now through the lens of middle age and sort of being beat up and tired and a little cynical, but it seems to me that that landscape 30 years ago was maybe a bit more dynamic. There were certain figures in the Western landscape that for an aspiring writer, some guy in his mid-20s trying to figure out how to make a living at this, certain figures seemed larger than life,
Yeah.
I think about Wallace Stegner, certainly you think about Ken Kesey. I think he falls into that. And even here in Montana, McWayne in his early days, he certainly cut a dashing figure. I look around, I don't see the equivalent. I don't see the Stegners and Keseys in Western letters now. I could be wrong. And again, I'm looking at it through maybe a jaded lens at this point. What are your thoughts, Russell? What do you think about the current state?
Well, what I thought of kind of right off the bat was that it feels a little bit like we're fighting so many other battles right now, as far as just trying to maintain some kind of connection to the West that you and I grew up in.
Yeah.
And it feels like a lot of the originality that you're talking about is being lost because there's so much expectation for writers from this region to sort of cave into what's expected of us instead of talking about what's really going on. And that feels to me like an ongoing fight that we have with, especially when Hollywood keeps recreating these same cardboard cutouts that they trot out for about the West, and so I don't know how much that impacts the landscape of literature from here, or how much of it is just shaped by the fact that Montana is changing. The West is changing. I don't know. It's a hard question to answer.
I think publishing is changing.
Yeah.
Business is changing. There is less receptivity within the publishing world to young writers who might become the next Stegner or Kesey, or I think it's fair to say I think it's much harder to get a start now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Not to say you can't do it, but I think the landscape is increasingly difficult for young writers.
Well, and the ones who have established themselves are finding it hard to continue. Like, I've talked to Mark Sprague, Larry Watson. I just interviewed him last week. He can't find a publisher for his most recent novel.
Yeah.
And these are guys that have been huge. It's hard to understand.
Yeah, it's very hard to understand. I didn't know that about Larry. That's just
Yeah. Why don't we talk about the how you see the role of writers and artists in the current political landscape? It feels like we have to think about a lot more than just telling stories these days. It feels a little deeper than that.
Yeah. I think storytelling can come in any number of forms. And I think telling an essential and urgent story is maybe more important now than it ever was. But whether that story comes in the form of a 300-word Insta post, or whether it comes in the form of a magazine article or a profile, or It's all stories, right? So
Right.
any successful piece of media that captures your attention, again, whether it's a photo, whether it's a short video, whether it's you're doom scrolling and you stop on a video, there's a narrative attached to everything. And so I think there's we're hardwired to accept and participate in stories, whatever form that takes.
Mm-hmm.
So as writers, we are uniquely positioned to take advantage of that. We are also sort of, there's a cacophony of voices out there now. I think about this a lot. So one of the things that's changed, 30 years ago, if you were or aspired to be a professional writer, you trained yourself, you went through a period of training, either self-taught or you went to an MFA program or you worked in a magazine. You did your internship in the publishing world, if you will, in some
Mm-hmm.
form or another. And then you were empowered either through talent and skill or social connection, professional connections. You were then empowered to find publication. So you were able to draw attention to your work through fairly traditional media, through fairly traditional avenues. Anybody can publish anything now.
Yeah. Right.
There are no guardrails and there are no qualifiers,
Mm-hmm.
beyond to the publication. So any influencer, if you will, in any medium can publish whatever they want. And as long as it gets attention, as long as it gets clicks, they consider it to be successful. And so, yeah, we are writers, we are professionals within this landscape. I'm not sure that means quite as much as it used to. Just because there are so many other voices out there.
Yeah.
It means something to us.
Right.
And it means something to avid readers, hopefully, who follow certain writers and certain careers.
Mm-hmm.
But for 90% of the folks out there who are consuming media, it doesn't mean a great deal.
Right.
So to answer your question, I don't know what our obligation is as writers. There is an obligation. I don't know that we are as important in this landscape as we would like to think, or as significant as we would have been even 20 years ago.
Right.
There's just so many voices.
Yeah.
So I think as writers, or as an aspiring writer, or as somebody who is just very good at the social media, I think the best thing you can do is be honest. It's just honest in the work, honest in your own opinions, honest in how you present yourself. Human beings have a very, very good nose for deceit and for someone who's being disingenuous. And so honesty, I think, is at the heart of any significant work, no matter what it is.
Right. Good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, in the end, that's what brings any kind of sense of satisfaction that we're going to get out of our work too.
Right.
Is, if we're putting stuff out there expecting something in return, that's not going to be a good formula for feeling satisfied and complete. So,
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, my friend. I really enjoyed this.
Oh, it feels like we're just getting warmed up, dude.
Thanks a lot for joining me for this episode of The Song of Roland, a podcast about American culture. I'd like to thank my guest for this week, Alan Morris Jones, the newly appointed Poet Laureate of Montana. I'd also like to thank Stephen Gillis of Dzonk Books for sponsoring this podcast, and I want to thank Tiffany Hauk for her wonderful production skills, and I would like to thank my son Fletcher for his musical contributions. Join me again next time for another episode of The Song of Roland.